My name is Nina, and I am 32 years. 6 months ago, my parents called me for the first time in 3 years and said something that finally made everything in my childhood make complete sense. We need money. You're our daughter. This is what family does. Just like that. No hello that acknowledged the 3 years of silence. No acknowledgement that the last time we had spoken it had ended with my father saying I was selfish for moving across the country for a job opportunity, and my mother crying in the particular performed way she had always cried. Not from genuine emotion, but from the specific deployment of tears as a management tool. Just, we need money. You're our daughter. This is what family does. I was sitting in my car outside the grocery store when they called. The particular ordinary mundanity of a Saturday afternoon, coffee cooling in the cup holder, a list on my phone, the weekend stretching ahead of me in the comfortable way of someone who has built a life that fits. My father's name on my screen. I almost didn't answer. I answered. Nina. His voice. The particular register of it, not warm, not cold, just transactional. The voice he used when he needed something, and I was the available option. Dad, I said. Your mother and I have been talking, he said. We're in a difficult situation. What kind of situation? I said carefully. He told me. The house, the one I had grown up in, the one they had never quite managed properly, the roof that had needed fixing for 5 years and had finally become urgent, the heating system that had been unreliable for longer than that, the accumulated deferred maintenance of people who had always found something else to spend money on. They needed $40,000. They needed it quickly. And they were calling me. Not because we had a relationship that made this a natural ask. Not because there was a history of mutual support and love and the kind of family connection that makes asking for help feel safe. Because I had money now. Because the daughter they had never quite prioritized had, through years of working quietly and carefully without anyone paying much attention, built a career that generated income they now found useful. We're your parents, my father said. When I didn't respond immediately. This is what family does. I looked out my car window at the ordinary Saturday afternoon. A woman loading groceries. A child on a bicycle. The world continuing its unremarkable business. I'll call you back, I said. Nina. I'll call you back, I said. I hung up and sat in my car for a long time. Let me tell you about growing up as Nina Petrov. My parents were not monsters. I want to say that first because the story is more nuanced than monsters, and nuance matters. They were people, complicated, self-absorbed, the particular kind of neglectful that doesn't look like neglect from the outside, because there was always food and always shelter and always the performance of family when performance was required. What there wasn't was attention. My mother's attention went to her social life, the friends, the clubs, the particular busyness of a woman who found the company of other adults more interesting than the company of her child. Not cruelly. Not deliberately. Just prioritized. I was managed rather than raised. Fed, clothed, enrolled in school, provided for in the logistical sense, and left to develop emotionally on my own. My father's attention went to himself. He was not a bad man. He worked. He provided. He was present at dinners in the physical sense. But his inner life was entirely his own, his projects, his opinions, his sense of himself as the most interesting person in any room. Children, in his framework, were accessories. Proof of adulthood rather than people to be known. I learned early to be self-sufficient. Not as a virtue, as a survival strategy. I did my homework without being asked, because asking invited the particular distracted hum of a parent whose attention was elsewhere. I navigated school socially without guidance, because guidance required a level of interest that wasn't available. I made decisions, increasingly significant decisions, without input, because input required someone who was paying attention. By the time I left for university, I was so thoroughly self-sufficient that my parents barely noticed I had gone. My mother called on birthdays. My father occasionally forwarded articles he thought might interest me, his own interests, nothing related to mine, the forwarding of a man who wanted to feel connected without investing in connection. I built my career. Slowly, carefully, in the particular way of someone who has learned that nobody is coming to make things easier and has decided to make them easier herself. I became a software architect. Good at it. Then very good at it. Then the kind of person who was recruited rather than applying, whose name was known in the industry, whose salary had crossed into the range that apparently registered on my parents' radar. Because here we were. $40,000. This is what family does. I called my best friend Priya from the car. They called, I said. Your parents, she said. They need $40,000, I said. Silence. Nina, she said. I know, I said. What are you going to do? I looked at my grocery list on my phone. Milk. Bread. The ordinary Saturday things. I don't know yet, I said. But I know I'm not going to decide in a parking lot. Good, she said. Come over. I'll make dinner. I went to Priya's. She made dinner. We talked for 3 hours about my parents, about the call, about the 32 years of self-sufficiency that had preceded it. Do you want to help them? She said finally. I thought about it honestly. No, I said. But I feel guilty about that. Why? She said. Because they're my parents, I said. They're your parents who called after 3 years of silence to ask for money, she said. That's different from parents. I sat with that distinction for a long time. I called Dr. Sarah on Monday, my therapist. 2 years of sessions that had been, among other things, a careful excavation of my childhood, the managed neglect of it, the self-sufficiency built from necessity. The particular patterns I had developed to navigate parents who were present and not present simultaneously. They called, I said when she answered. She knew immediately what I meant. Tell me, she said. I told her everything. The car. The 40,000. This is what family does. When I finished, she said, how did it feel to hear his voice? I thought about it. Like being 9 again, I said. The specific feeling of needing something and knowing it wasn't coming. What did you need at 9? She said. Someone to notice, I said. Just notice. That I had a science project due. That I had a friend situation that was hard. That I existed in a way that required some attention. Did they notice? Not really, I said. Not consistently. And now, she said carefully, they're asking you to notice them. In a very significant financial way. Yes, I said. How does that land? I thought about the word for it. Ironic, I said. Is that allowed? It feels ironic. It's allowed, she said. It's also accurate. I went home and looked at my finances. Not because I was considering giving them the money, I wasn't, not yet, not without thinking it through properly. But because I needed to understand what $40,000 meant in context. It was significant. Not catastrophic. I had built carefully and saved carefully and my emergency fund was solid. But significant. More significant was what it represented. Not the money itself. The ask. The specific entitlement of this is what family does from people who had not done what family does for 32 years. Who had not noticed the science project or the friend situation or the career I had built without their interest or support. Who had called after 3 years of silence with a number rather than an apology. I pulled out an old journal. I had kept journals since I was 12, the particular habit of a child who needed somewhere to process things that nobody in her house was available to process with her. I went back to the early ones. Read through them with the particular strange emotion of encountering your own past self. There was an entry from when I was 13. Mom had her book club tonight. Dad watched the game. I made myself dinner and did my homework and nobody asked how the math test went. I got an A. I'm going to write it here because nobody else will know. I got an A. Nobody else will know. 13 years old. Writing her achievements in a journal because there was nobody to tell. I closed the journal. I sat in my apartment in my 32-year-old life and felt something I needed to name precisely. Not anger. I had processed most of the anger in 2 years of therapy. Grief. The specific grief of a child who had deserved more and had not received it and was now being asked to give what had never been given to her. And underneath the grief, something harder. Clarity. I am not going to give them $40,000, I thought. Not because I can't. Because I won't. The distinction mattered. My father called again on Wednesday. I answered. Have you thought about it? He said. No preamble. No, how are you? Just the question, direct and expecting an answer. Yes, I said. I've thought about it a lot. And? I want to talk, I said. Not about the money specifically. About some things that I've never said out loud. A pause. What things? He said. Slightly wary. About growing up, I said. About what it was like. About the journal entry I found where I was 13 and I got an A on a math test and I wrote it in my journal because nobody in the house was going to know. Silence. Nina. I'm not calling to attack you, I said. I'm calling because you asked me for something significant, and I think before we talk about that we need to talk about the context. About the relationship. About what it actually has been. A longer silence. Okay, he said. Finally. The word of a man who had been expecting a yes or a no and was recalibrating. I'll come home, I said. Next weekend. We'll talk. About the money? About everything, I said. The money is the last thing we'll talk about. I drove home on a Friday. For hours. The particular focused calm of someone doing something significant and choosing not to catastrophize it in advance. I had done this before, driven home to a house that had never quite felt like home, navigated the particular atmosphere of parents who were glad to see me in the way of people who find your presence convenient. This time was different. This time I had things to say. My mother met me at the door. She hugged me, the particular hug of someone performing warmth rather than feeling it, the arms that didn't quite hold on. I noticed it the way I always had. I let it be what it was. My father was in the living room. He stood when I came in. Looked at me with the assessing expression he always had, not unkind, just evaluating. Calculating where I fit in his current situation. Nina, he said. Dad, I said. We sat down. My mother brought tea. And I began. Not with anger, with the particular calm of someone who has spent 32 years preparing for a conversation they didn't know they were preparing for. I told them about the journal entry. I told them about the science project nobody had asked about. About the friend situation in 7th grade that I had navigated completely alone. About the university acceptance that I had announced at dinner and that had generated a "that's good" before the conversation moved on. About the career built in silence. The promotions nobody had called to celebrate. The apartment I had furnished alone. The life assembled without anyone paying attention. I told them about the self-sufficiency that was not a virtue but a necessity. About the child who had learned to need nothing because needing things from them had taught her that needing was unreliable. I spoke for 40 minutes. They listened. My mother was crying by the end, the real kind this time, I thought, or close enough to the real kind that the distinction didn't matter. My father was very still. When I finished, he said, I didn't know you felt that way. I know, I said. That's part of what I'm telling you. We did our best. I know you did, I said. Your best wasn't enough. Those two things are both true. He looked at his hands. The money, my mother started. We'll get to the money, I said. I want to ask you something first. What? My father said. If I hadn't built a career that generated income, I said, would you have called? Silence. Long silence. The silence of two people being asked a question they know the honest answer to and are deciding whether to give it. I don't know, my mother said finally. Which was, I understood, the honest answer. Thank you, I said, for telling me the truth. We talked for 4 more hours. Not the managed conversation of people performing family, the real version, with the particular awkwardness of people who don't know each other as well as they should and are beginning to understand why. My mother talked about her own childhood, distant parents, the template she had been given for what parenting looked like. Not as an excuse, as context. My father talked about his father, the specific coldness of a man who had treated children as interruptions. About not knowing how to be different from what he had been shown. I listened. I did not soften it for them, but I listened. And by the end of 4 hours, I understood something I hadn't before. They had not neglected me from malice. They had neglected me from the particular human failure of people who had never been taught how to pay attention and had not sought to learn. That understanding did not change what had happened, but it changed what I did next. I slept in my childhood bedroom. The room unchanged, the desk, the bookshelf, the window that faced the garden. I lay in the dark and thought about the 4 hours of conversation and what it had given me. Not resolution. Not the clean ending of a difficult chapter. Something more honest than that. Understanding. The beginning of it. My parents were not who I had needed them to be. They were not who they should have been. And they were, genuinely, imperfectly, late, trying to understand something about what they had done. That was not nothing. But it was also not $40,000. I made my decision in the morning. Sat at their kitchen table with coffee and the particular clarity of someone who has slept on something important and woken up knowing the answer. My mother sat across from me. My father stood at the window. I'm not going to give you $40,000, I said. My mother's face. Nina. I'm not finished, I said. She stopped. I'm not giving you $40,000 because that amount of money given in response to a phone call after 3 years of silence is not a family transaction. It's a financial transaction. And financial transactions don't fix what we talked about yesterday. My father turned from the window. Then what does fix it, he said. Not defensively. Genuinely. Time, I said. Asterisk, consistent attention. The kind of relationship where you call because you want to know how I am, not because you need something. I paused. If we build that, if we spend the next year actually talking, actually knowing each other, then we can talk about the roof. The roof can't wait a year, my father said. I know, I said. Which is why I've spent this morning looking at options. I had 3 hours the night before after they'd gone to bed. Contractors. Financing options. The specific practical problem of an aging house with deferred maintenance. I slid a folder across the table. There are 2 contractors in this area with good reviews and reasonable rates, I said. There's a home equity line of credit option that your house qualifies for based on its current value. The monthly payments would be manageable on your combined income. I paused. I will help you navigate the application. I will be a reference if needed. I will help you find the best contractor. But not the money, my father said. Not the money, I said. Not yet. Not until we have a relationship that earns it. My mother looked at the folder. Something moved across her face, not the performed tears, not the management tool. Something that looked like, for the first time, genuine reckoning. That's fair, she said quietly. My father looked at her. Then at me. Okay, he said. Okay, Nina. 1 year later. My parents called every Sunday. Not because I had demanded it, because we had agreed, during the year that followed my visit, to try. To actually try. With the specific intentionality of people who have acknowledged that what they had was not enough and have decided to build something better. The calls were imperfect. My father still had the habit of making himself the center of conversations, catching himself, sometimes, and redirecting. My mother still had the impulse toward performance, the managed warmth that I could now distinguish from genuine warmth and could gently name when it appeared. But they showed up. Every Sunday. Without fail. And the calls were getting longer. Richer. The particular accumulation of two people getting to know their daughter and one woman getting to know her parents in the way she should have been able to from the beginning. The roof got fixed in April. They had used the home equity line, navigated the application with my help, chosen one of the contractors from the folder I had left. My father had called me after the contractor's first visit, genuinely excited about the process in the way of someone who had finally taken ownership of a problem rather than outsourcing it. He says we can have it done in 3 weeks, he said. That's great, Dad, I said. Nina, he stopped. Started again. Thank you. For the folder. For not just for making us figure it out. It was your house, I said. It needed to be your solution. I understand that now, he said. My mother called me one Thursday, not Sunday, not scheduled, just Thursday. I found something, she said. What? I said. An old report card, she said. From when you were in 5th grade. Your teacher wrote, she stopped. Her voice was not entirely steady. She wrote that you were one of the most self-directed students she had ever taught. That you had an exceptional ability to motivate yourself. I sat down. I didn't know that was a compliment then, my mother said. Asterisk, I thought it just meant you were easy. That you didn't need much. She stopped again. I understand now that self-directed meant you had learned to manage alone. Because we weren't, because I wasn't. Mom, I said. I'm sorry, she said. Nina. I'm really sorry. Not the performed version. The real one. I pressed my hand flat against my kitchen counter. I know, I said. Thank you for calling to tell me. I thought you should know that I see it now, she said. What it meant. What you were doing. I know you see it, I said. I can tell. We talked for an hour. About the report card. About 5th grade. About the science projects and the math tests and the particular loneliness of a child who had learned to celebrate alone. And then about other things, lighter things, ordinary things, the things that fill an hour between two people who are finally learning each other. I want to say something to you. If your parents called after years of silence and the call was about money, if you have been the self-sufficient one, the one who handled everything alone, the one who wrote achievements in a journal because nobody else was going to know, you are allowed to say no. Not as punishment. Not as cruelty. As the honest reflection of a relationship that has not yet earned what it is asking for. And you are allowed to offer something different. Not the money. The possibility. The possibility of a relationship that is built properly, with attention and consistency and the particular investment of people who have decided that knowing you is worth the effort. That possibility is yours to offer or withhold. On your terms. At your pace. The self-sufficiency you built was not a character flaw. It was what you needed to survive the childhood you were given. But you are not a child anymore. And the life you have built, the career, the apartment, the Saturdays that fit, the Sunday calls that are getting richer. That life is yours. Every bit of it. Built by you. For you. And you decide what gets added to it. Including, if you choose, the people who should have been there from the beginning and are finally, imperfectly, trying to show up. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Did your parents ever ask for something after years of not being there? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one. Tell me where you are watching from. I love knowing how far these stories reach. Until next time, you decide what gets added to your life. Always.